laws, but applied on a galactic level. As we move into this geometry, we go into a higher structure, and there does appear to be intelligence to it in that it's actually rewriting DNA on the Earth. Now, what's so fascinating is that you can break the 62 million year cycle down into 10, which again would represent the 10 points around an icosahedron, and those 10 units are now going to be 6.2 million years in length each. What's so fascinating about that is that that exact number appears on Sumerian clay tablets and was discovered by the Director of Communications for the Apollo moon missions, Dr. Maurice Chatelain. And the thing is, it's a common denominator for all the planetary orbits in the solar system. Every planetary orbit is a perfect multiple, or subdivision rather, of 6.2 million years, which means you could take Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Halley's Comet, all these other things, multiply them by a rational integer, by a round number, and they will add up to this one number that was on Sumerian clay tablets down to the second with precision. That means all the planets in the solar system are part of a gigantic Swiss watch, a perfect clock that can be timed down to the second. And remember, this cycle is exactly 1/10 of what we've now discovered as 62 million years, which is an evolutionary cycle. Now, if you can stay with me so far on that, let me give you one other thing. Dr. Maurice Chatelain also calculated that the precession of the equinoxes, this big 25,920-year cycle that we've all been talking about that ends in 2012, is exactly 240 units in the 6.2 million years, down to the second. Again, this suggests that galactic energy fields are responsible for driving mass evolutions in the fossil record, the 62 million year intervals, driving the more recent one that we see in 25 million year intervals, driving the actual orbits of the planets in 6.2 million year intervals, and then driving the precession of the equinoxes 1/240th of the Sumerian cycle. What that means to me is that the precession of the equinoxes is also a cycle that is driving biological evolution on the planet. Specifically now, I looked back through history, this is the first time I've ever said this publicly, and what I found is that the Neanderthals die out almost exactly 25,000 years ago, and if you go back 50,000 years ago in the fossil record, there is a spontaneous emergence in terms of human artifacts of creativity, spirituality, art, and insight, where everything up until 50,000 years ago is only used for survival purposes. There's nothing that's used for higher inspiration, higher creativity whatsoever. And then, bam, there's a worldwide field effect that happens 50,000 years ago where everybody suddenly gets a lot more interesting to hang out with at that point. Now, what I believe this says is that we're dealing with a galactically programmed cycle that actually rewrites the code of DNA, and you've heard me say this many times. Look at the Russian experiments where they shine a laser through salamander eggs, take that digital genetic information that goes into the photons of the laser and shine it into frog eggs, and the frog eggs actually mutate into salamander eggs, which means we have laboratory evidence, and in Source Field Investigations, my new book coming out in May or June, hopefully, there's going to be multiple documented proof that this can be done to DNA. I show it with spiders. I show it with this weird guy named Igina in Italy who did it by like changing a rat's tail into a cat's tail with energy fields. There's multiple examples. You got Conchazin, this Korean scientist who changed the eggs inside a chicken's womb into half duck, half chicken creatures just by zapping a duck. What I'm saying is the evolutionary impulse is based on a digital code. The genetic code can be scrambled into photons and then zapped with DNA. The DNA gets rewritten. This is the basis of what evolution is really about. I do not believe that evolution involves everybody having to be killed off. If pole shifts were happening all the time, life would not survive on the Earth. The pole shift is a catastrophic event that would basically wipe out the whole evolutionary record. So I think that these ideas that catastrophes are going to happen, I am aware of Dolores Cannon. I do respect her work highly, But in this particular case, I don't think what we're looking at is a pole shift. I think if you actually go back to the original Zoroastrian scriptures, this represents the oldest and most well-preserved documentation from the ancient ancestors, the astronauts who came here and left for whatever reason. Probably the last time they were around is around the foundation of Islam, 700 AD, because you hear all the stories about the jinns in the Quran. Ever since then, it seems like they've largely been absent. But prior to that time, there was a lot of human ET interaction. And it seems that they were preparing us for this with all these prophecies. And again, you go back to the Zoroastrian scripture, and they do not say that there's going to be a pole shift. And then there's these two scholars, Boyce and Grenett, who wrote a book called The History of Zoroastrianism. It's like this thick. It's about $500 to buy it. I was able to get it on interlibrary loan. And they systematically go through and show how all the Zoroastrian material was then co-opted by the Hindus, co-opted by the Buddhists, co-opted by the Hebrews, co-opted by the Christians. The whole apocalyptic myth is a derivation of what was originally said in the Zoroastrian tradition. And they make a strong case that back in the Old Testament, the Hebrews were being persecuted, and they read in their own sorrow to the apocalyptic myth and added in catastrophe that was not in the Zoroastrian tradition. So if you actually go back to what the Zoroastrian tradition says, they talk about Ahura Mazda, which is their version of God. They talk about what they call the adversary. The word adversary means Ahriman. It's also been translated as Set Ahriman, or Satan. Satan literally does mean the adversary if you look up the translation. In the Zoroastrian tradition, the first time Satan's ever mentioned in any scripture, okay, he's called the adversary, and it says Ahura Mazda made Satan, made the adversary to be defeated at the end of the age. It does not say that there's going to be a catastrophe. It says there will be earth changes, but that they stop at a certain point before the earth is destroyed. You see some of this preserved in the Hindu tradition, where they talk about the arrival of Kalki, the destroyer, who basically comes in and kicks ass and wipes out these negative guys, because remember, Ahura Mazda made the adversary to be defeated, and they said that it would be a gradual, wheezing defeat. It doesn't happen all at once, but it just loses one thing, and then another wheel falls off the car, and it goes on and on and on, but there is a defeat. So that's the original Cliff Notes from the ETs that came here before it all got messed up. It was never intended to be a pole shift or an apocalypse, and it's actually happening remarkably well in alignment, and I believe the initial manifestation of what the Hindus call the prophecy of Kalki is starting to happen now with all these pieces of military hardware being deactivated, and things are about to get very, very interesting.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Quite extensive, and thank you for doing all that amazing research. At the moment, we have a choice on going possibly another 20 minutes or so until 6:30 California time. And I do have a question to go to give Richard Hoagland at this time, so we do want to have him answer. It's sort of a composite question, and then possibly we can close down this conference with people feeling that they got their money's worth, which is very important to all of us, I'm sure. So at this moment, Richard, I've unmuted you, and the question that we have for you is to tell us more about what's going on Phobos, and also if you could also answer that whether Nazis are running the USA, Nazis from paperclip situation.
Kerry, this must give you a remarkable sense of something, being able to mute and unmute me and David and Bill. How did Kerry...
Well, it's absolutely necessary.
Okay.
Because each of you can talk for miles, and we welcome that, actually. So, Richard, if you don't mind, let's have you answer these questions, and then if everyone is agreeable, we will end around 6:30. You have at least 20 minutes to answer those two questions.
I think we can get a lot more questions in 20 minutes. And I'm voting for we go on, because we had so many technical problems in the beginning that I don't think people did get their money's worth, and